girl unexpectedly received a call with an offer to adopt a dying donkey. Her answer was the warm Texas night wrapped around Peyton's small house like a comforting blanket. The cicadas hummed their endless song, and the air carried the scent of dry hay and dust from the nearby fields. She sat on her bed, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, planning to call it an early night after an exhausting day. Then, her phone vibrated. The name on the screen made her frown. Cody, her childhood friend, the one who always seemed to get himself into the strangest situations. Peyton hesitated for a second before answering. "Cody, do you have any idea what time it is?" she grumbled. But his voice on the other end wasn't his usual playful tone. He sounded worried, almost desperate. "Peyton, I need your help. It's urgent." She sat up straight. "What happened?" "It's a baby donkey. Its mother abandoned it right after birth. It's weak, and if I leave it overnight, it won't make it. I can't take care of it. Peyton, please, you're my only hope." Peyton blinked. A baby donkey? That was the last thing she expected to hear. She ran a hand through her hair, sighing. "Cody, I don't know the first thing about raising a donkey. I have school, I have work, and I just sent you a picture. Look at it, and then tell me you're still saying no." Her phone pinged. With a mix of curiosity and annoyance, she opened the message, and her heart nearly broke. The photo showed a tiny, fragile creature curled up in a bed of straw. Its fur was still damp, its body thin and frail, its ears drooped, and its dark, round eyes, filled with confusion and fear, stared right at the camera. A lump formed in Peyton's throat. She had always had a soft spot for animals, and this little one looked so helpless, so lost. "Bring him over." 20 minutes later, Cody pulled into Peyton's driveway, his truck rumbling to a stop. He stepped out, carefully cradling a small bundle wrapped in a thick blanket. Peyton opened the door, her chest tightening when she saw the baby donkey up close. He was even smaller than she had expected, barely bigger than a medium-sized dog. His fur was damp, and his tiny body shivered. She reached out, gently touching the top of his head. "Hey, little guy. You're safe now." Cody carefully placed the donkey on the floor, and Peyton knelt beside him, making a quick assessment. His breathing was shallow, and his tiny legs looked too weak to support his weight. "I tried getting him to drink some milk, but he won't take it," Cody admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Peyton frowned. If he didn't eat soon, his body would shut down. She stood up and hurried to the kitchen, grabbing a small bottle she had used for orphaned kittens before. She filled it with warm milk and returned to the living room, sitting cross-legged next to the tiny donkey. She held the bottle close to his mouth, gently nudging his lips. But he turned away, refusing to drink. Panic rose in her chest. "No! You have to fight, little guy!" She tried again, but he remained still, his body trembling. His breathing grew weaker, and Peyton felt the sting of tears in her eyes. She refused to let him slip away. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a small syringe and gently pushed a few drops of milk into his mouth. At first he resisted, but after a moment he swallowed. Encouraged, she repeated the process, drop by drop, whispering softly to him. "Come on, little guy, just a little more." Time passed in slow, agonizing minutes. The night outside was silent, except for the occasional hoot of an owl. Peyton kept going, determined not to give up. And then, at around 3 a.m., something changed. The donkey made a small, soft noise, barely more than a whimper. Slowly, he lifted his tiny head, his dark eyes meeting hers, and then, to her utter relief, he leaned into her touch. Peyton let out a shaky breath. "You did it. You chose to fight." She gently wrapped him in a warm blanket, cradling him in her lap as exhaustion finally took over. The little donkey nuzzled against her, his breathing now steady. That was the moment Peyton knew. This wasn't just some animal she had agreed to help for a night. He was hers now, and she would do everything in her power to keep him safe. Peyton woke up to the soft warmth of something pressed against her chest. For a brief, she thought it was her old dog curled up beside her like he used to. But then she felt the unfamiliar texture of short, coarse fur against her fingers. She opened her eyes and saw Jack, his small head resting against her arm, his breathing slow and steady. It took a second for the memory of last night to come rushing back. The phone call, the fear, the tiny, fragile creature that had almost slipped away, and now here he was, curled up against her, alive. Peyton let out a slow breath, a mix of relief and realization washing over her. Jack stirred slightly as she moved, his large, dark eyes blinking up at her. He let out a tiny sound, something between a whimper and a snort. It was the smallest, most pitiful noise, and Peyton felt her heart clench. "Hey, little guy," she murmured, gently running her fingers along his head. "You made it through the night." Jack wobbled slightly as he tried to move, his thin legs struggling under his own weight. Peyton quickly helped him up, her hands supporting his fragile frame. He was still weak, but there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. "All right, let's get you fed," she said, standing up and stretching. Her entire body ached from sleeping in such an awkward position on the floor, but she pushed the discomfort aside. There was something more important to take care of now. She went into the kitchen, preparing a fresh bottle of warm milk. This time, when she brought it to Jack's mouth, he hesitated, but didn't turn away. She gently nudged the tip against his lips, and to her immense relief, he began to drink. Slowly, carefully, but he was drinking. Peyton smiled. "That's it, buddy. You're getting stronger already." The morning passed in a blur of small victories. Jack took a few shaky steps around the living room, his legs still wobbly but showing signs of improvement. He would fall, then look up at Peyton as if expecting her to help, and she always did. By midday, he was following her clumsily around the house, his tiny hooves clicking against the wooden floor. She had never imagined her day would look like this, babysitting a newborn donkey in her own home, but strangely it felt right, like this was exactly where she was meant to be. The first real challenge came that afternoon. Jack, still exploring his new surroundings, decided that Peyton's couch was the perfect place to rest. He clumsily climbed onto it, his little body sprawled awkwardly across the cushions. Peyton laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, no way, buddy. That's not happening." She gently lifted him off and placed him back on the floor. He let out a soft grunt of protest, but didn't resist, at least not at first. Minutes later, when she turned her back, she heard a sudden thud. Spinning around, she found Jack on the couch again, staring at her with an innocent, almost defiant expression. Peyton crossed her arms. "Jack, off." Jack did not move. She sighed, rubbing her temples. This was going to be interesting. By the end of the day, it was clear that Jack was stubborn. He wanted to be wherever Peyton was, which meant following her into every room, nudging her for attention, and yes, trying to climb onto every piece of furniture he could find. "You're lucky you're cute," Peyton muttered, as she carefully laid out a pile of blankets in the corner for him to sleep on. "This is your bed, okay? Not the couch, not my bed. Here." Jack sniffed the blankets, then looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Peyton sighed, giving his head a soft pat. "This is going to be a long journey, isn't it?" That night, as she lay in bed, she heard the soft shuffling of hooves against the floor. A few moments later, there was a plop, the sound of Jack settling down right next to her bed. Peyton smiled to herself, closing her eyes. Yes, this was going to be a long journey, but somehow she already knew she wouldn't trade it for anything. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting golden light across the wooden floor. Peyton stirred awake, stretching her arms before noticing the soft breathing beside her. Peeking over the edge of the bed, she found Jack curled up tightly on the rug, his small body rising and falling with each steady breath. She smiled. He had stayed close to her all night, refusing to sleep anywhere else. She hadn't expected to wake up to a baby donkey as her new roommate, but after the last 2 days it no longer felt strange. Jack had quickly become a part of her life, whether she was ready for it or not. Slipping out of bed, Peyton walked to the kitchen to prepare his bottle. As soon as she started warming the milk, she heard the familiar sound of tiny hooves clicking against the floor. Turning around, she saw Jack standing in the doorway, ears perked, eyes alert. "Well, good morning to you too," she chuckled, shaking the bottle to test the temperature. "Hungry?" Jack let out a soft snort, stepping closer. He still wobbled slightly, but his legs seemed stronger today. When she held out the bottle, he latched onto it eagerly, drinking faster than before. It was a relief to see his appetite improving. As he finished, Peyton wiped the small dribble of milk from his mouth, ruffling the fur between his ears. "You're getting the hang of this, huh?" The rest of the morning was spent adapting to their new routine. Peyton had expected Jack to need constant supervision, but what she hadn't expected was just how much he wanted to be involved in everything she did. If she walked to the bathroom, Jack followed. If she went to the laundry room, Jack was right behind her. Even as she sat at the kitchen table scrolling through emails, he stood beside her, nudging her arm every few minutes for attention. "You're the clingiest little thing, aren't you?" Peyton sighed, though she couldn't help but laugh. She had never been alone much before, but this was different. Jack wasn't just a pet, he was a shadow, always by her side. By the afternoon, Peyton decided Jack needed some fresh air. Carrying him outside took more effort than expected. He had put on a little weight since arriving, but eventually they made it to the small fenced yard. She placed him on the grass and stepped back, watching curiously. Jack hesitated, his tiny hooves sinking slightly into the soft ground. Then, slowly, he took a step, and another. Soon he was exploring, sniffing the air, twitching his ears at the sounds of birds overhead. Peyton leaned against the porch railing, a warm feeling spreading in her chest. Maybe this was crazy, maybe she had no idea what she was doing, but as she watched Jack take his first steps into his new world, she knew one thing for certain: this was exactly where they were meant to be. By the fourth day, Peyton realized one undeniable truth. Jack was not just a baby donkey. He was a tiny, mischievous force of nature. It started small. Peyton had left him in the living room while she went to take a quick shower. When she returned, she found Jack standing on the couch, his big dark eyes staring at her as if he had done nothing wrong. "Jack, no," she pointed at the floor. "Get down." Jack flicked his ears but didn't move. Peyton sighed, walking over and gently lifting him off the couch. He weighed more than she remembered, and she could already tell he wouldn't be this easy to pick up for much longer. "This is not a habit we're starting," she muttered as she set him down. Jack let out a small huff, flicked his tail, and promptly trotted over to the coffee table, where he attempted to climb onto that instead. By lunchtime, Peyton had learned two things. First, Jack was incredibly persistent, and second, she was going to need a serious strategy if she ever hoped to keep her furniture intact. Her phone buzzed. It was Cody. "How's the little troublemaker?" he asked, amusement clear in his voice. Peyton glanced at Jack, who was now attempting to chew on the corner of a throw pillow. "Oh, just wonderful," she said dryly, snatching the pillow away before he could destroy it. "Apparently he thinks my house is a jungle gym," Cody laughed. "Told you he'd keep you on your toes." As if on cue, Jack trotted over to Peyton, nudging her knee with his nose. It was his way of demanding attention. She sighed, setting the pillow aside and scratching behind his ears. "I just don't know how to teach him boundaries," she admitted. "It's not like I can send him to obedience school." "Well, you're the one who took him in," Cody teased. "Guess you'll have to figure it out." Peyton rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. Yeah, thanks for the help, genius." After hanging up, she decided it was time to try something new. She grabbed a bundle of hay and spread it out in the corner of the room, placing a soft blanket beside it. Then she took a few of Jack's favorite things: his bottle, a small stuffed animal she had given him on the first night, and a piece of rope he liked to chew on. "All right, buddy," she said, kneeling beside him. "This is your space, okay? Not my couch, not my coffee table, this." Jack sniffed the hay, then looked up at her, unimpressed. Peyton groaned. "Come on, work with me here." To her surprise, Jack stepped onto the blanket, circled twice, and plopped down with a content sigh. Peyton blinked. "Wait, that worked?" Jack stretched his legs and flicked his ears as if to say, "Of course it worked, I just wanted you to figure it out." Peyton laughed, shaking her head. "You are impossible." But as she watched him settle in, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to figure this out together. Days passed, and Peyton slowly adjusted to life with Jack. Her once quiet home was now filled with the soft sound of tiny hooves tapping against the floor, the occasional rustling of hay, and Jack's constant need for attention. Despite his stubborn streak, he had quickly become the heart of her daily routine. Every morning she woke up to find him curled up next to her bed, his ears twitching as he dreamed. When she moved, he woke instantly, blinking up at her with sleepy eyes, ready for his breakfast. One morning, as she prepared his bottle, she felt something press against the back of her legs. Turning around, she saw Jack standing behind her, his nose nuzzling into her knee. "You don't have to remind me, you know," she said, laughing. "Your bottle is almost ready." Jack huffed dramatically and plopped onto the kitchen floor, as if to say, "I'll wait, but I won't be happy about it." After feeding him, Peyton decided to take him outside again. He had been getting stronger, his once wobbly legs now steady beneath him. She led him into the backyard, watching as he took careful steps through the grass. At first, he stayed close to her side, his small frame pressing against her leg for comfort. But after a few minutes, he grew bolder, trotting forward, his tail flicking as he explored. Peyton watched with pride. Just days ago, he had been too weak to stand, and now he was running, well, almost running. His little legs still made him look more like a clumsy puppy than a donkey. She sat down on the porch, letting him explore on his own. But no matter how far he wandered, he always turned back to check if she was still there. Jack never let her out of his sight. The thought made Peyton smile. She had taken him in to save him, but now, in a way, he had become her protector too. The peaceful moment didn't last long. Suddenly, Jack spotted a butterfly fluttering near the fence. His ears perked up, and without hesitation, he took off after it. "Jack, wait!" Peyton called, but he was too excited to listen. His tiny legs carried him forward in an unsteady sprint, his eyes locked on his target. Then, just as he was about to reach the butterfly, he tripped over his own hooves and tumbled forward, rolling onto his side. Peyton gasped and ran toward him. "Jack, are you okay?" For a moment he just lay there, legs sprawled awkwardly. Then, to her surprise, he let out a tiny snort, almost like a laugh. Peyton shook her head, relieved. "You're ridiculous, you know that?" Jack got back up, shook the dirt from his fur, and trotted back to her side, as if nothing had happened. She knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "Come on, troublemaker, let's go inside." As they walked back, Peyton realized something. Jack wasn't just a pet. He was family. Jack was growing, fast. What once had been a tiny, fragile creature, small enough to curl up beside Peyton's bed, was now turning into a sturdy, energetic little donkey. His legs were longer, his body filling out, and his curiosity was more unstoppable than ever. With his newfound strength came a new problem. Jack had officially entered his rebellious phase. It started innocently enough. One morning, Peyton woke up to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen. She bolted out of bed, heart racing, only to find Jack standing in the middle of an absolute mess. The trash can had been knocked over, its contents scattered across the floor. An empty cereal box dangled from Jack's mouth, his ears twitching as if he had no idea what went wrong. Peyton crossed her arms. "Jack?" He froze, staring at her with big, guilty eyes. Then, as if deciding to double down on his mistake, he took one last dramatic bite of the cereal box. Peyton groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." By the time she cleaned up, Jack had already moved on to his next act of mischief, trying to drag her favorite blanket across the room to add to his bedding. Peyton barely managed to wrestle it away before he could claim it as his own. "Jack, you have your blankets," she huffed, pointing to his designated sleeping area. "Mine are not part of your collection." Jack flicked his tail, clearly unimpressed with her reasoning. As the days passed, his stubborn streak only grew. Whenever Peyton wasn't looking, he found new ways to push boundaries. She caught him trying to climb onto the couch again. She found chew marks on the corner of her coffee table. One afternoon, he somehow figured out how to nudge open the bathroom door, leaving her no privacy whatsoever. Cody thought it was hilarious. "You realize you basically have a toddler, right?" he said, laughing over the phone. Peyton sighed, watching as Jack attempted to steal one of her shoes right in front of her. "Yeah, except toddlers grow out of this phase. Jack is just getting started." Still, despite the trouble, Peyton couldn't stay mad for long. Every time she scolded him, he'd give her that innocent, wide-eyed look that made her heart melt. And no matter how much trouble he caused during the day, he always made up for it at night. Curling up beside her, pressing his head against her leg, his soft breathing lulling them both to sleep. One evening, after a particularly chaotic day of Jack trying to jump onto the low porch railing, Peyton sat beside him, stroking his ears. "You're a handful, you know that?" she murmured. Jack let out a content sigh, leaning into her touch. Despite everything, the chaos, the mess, the exhaustion, Peyton knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't trade this for the world.